Hello everyone. Welcome to this online lecture about facing Gaia, the construction of nature. First off, welcome to my living room, and I'm wearing these headphones because then you can hear me a little bit clearer than when I speak to the microphone of my laptop. This is a bit strange situation as I'm not really a vlogger. Normally, this is my first vlog really. But given the situation, I have to give you this online workshop on the literature of facing Gaia now through these online means. We will discuss the first chapter of Latour's Facing Gaia, the construction of nature, and then we will have a short assignment where you have to investigate how you yourself construct nature. Then after that, we will have a second part where we discuss the difference between facts and values, or in other words, the is-ought fallacy. And also after that, you will have some short assignments to see how that works for you, as to really be able to use the abstract and terms you hear in philosophy. And after the meeting, we will have a Q&A in which you can also ask other questions also about the assignment. Upcoming assignment is about the soundscape. And of course, we discuss the text of Facing Gaia because you have to take a short, very short 3-question take-home exam about this text. So I will first tell you something about philosophy in general, as not all of you are philosophers, and you might want to know what philosophy is really about. So very quickly, very briefly, philosophy is by some not even considered to be a science, and by some others it's considered to be above or beyond the sciences. You could also describe philosophy as having just one method, the method of thought, of conceptualizing ideas, and many different theories. So even one philosopher can have a lot of different type theories and just one method doing so. This basic method of conceptualization, and concepts you should not make them too big, it's just the abstract ways that we think of our reality with. So these are just words that we structure our thoughts with. But these concepts have to appeal to at least 2 things. First is through basic intuition of how the world is, as otherwise we do not believe it and we think that the theory that's conceptualized is simply wrong. The other necessity of philosophy is that it all has to be logically valid, so that one thing comes from the next. Then what do philosophers discuss? These are mainly the unanswerable questions that cannot be answered on a purely empirical account. So not only by doing research about doing testing of how things are in the world. So these are questions about other areas. So first of all, so when we look at the areas of philosophy, we can define different areas. So the first area is, for instance, of what is being, and what is it to be. The second thing is to what is it to know. How can we gain knowledge about a certain thing? And a third thing, field of philosophy, is what is of this world and what is above it. So what is the metaphysics? Then you have a lot of also concrete fields of philosophy, for instance, ethics or political philosophy of how we live together. And next to that, you also have many other fields conceptualizing about what is beauty, or many other different things. So the first lecture of Latour on the instability of the notion of nature, it's called, and it's about the mutation to the relation to the world. So the relationship we as humans have to the world we stay in. Latour goes on to say, we are used to one world. We are now mutating into another. We still stay calm, stoic, as if no mutation is at issue. He states at page 8, if a radical mutation were really at issue, we would have all already modified the basis of our existence from top to bottom. we would have begun to change our food, our habitats, our means of transportations, our cultural technologies, in short, our modes of production. Every time we heard the sirens, we would have rushed out of our shelters to invent new technologies equal to the threat. In any case, we would have already acted. Um, Here he states what he describes what would have happened if something is at hand. But then he goes on. But there we are. But here we are. I mean, what could have been just a passing crisis has turned into a profound alteration of the relation to the world. It seems as though we have become the people who could have acted 30 or 40 years ago, and who did nothing or far too little. It is a strange situation. We crossed a series of thresholds. We went through total war, and we hardly noticed a thing. Here it is important that he points out that we could have acted. We now actively live in a world from the past, he says later on in one of the other lectures. We live in an active history of the world, of what no longer is, but what we can still witness and live in our direct environment, in our surroundings. But what is, and which no longer is, which is a thing of the past. And we hardly notice the thing. We put our lives above listening and responding for what is at hand. Something strange is at hand. As to why haven't we responded? We do respond in other situations, for instance, when there's a situation of safety or security, but we remained impassive. We moved along like sleepwalkers when the alarm bells sounded. They've been disconnected one after another. Then Latour starts to discuss the new climate regime, what it is about. And he tried to as much describe it, but not in an indifferent way. He's localized and he's situated in the world, and he cares about what the world is about. What it means to live in a new climate condition is what this book is about. In the first part of the first lecture, Latour tries to differentiate nature from culture, and how we as humans in every way construct what nature is. So then Latour continues to point out 4 ways to be driven crazy by ecology. What is interesting is that he uses the definition of madness from psychiatry. So to describe the present condition of what we are, he uses the definition of psychiatry, an alteration of the relation to the world. And we all face this, but we all face this in different ways. And I will quickly point these out because a lot of philosophers describe different groups and also use parts or some of these subgroups Latour points out. So this is some way to come to grips with how we can view society. The first group Latour points out are the quietists. Other philosophers call them the traditionalists or the conservative, but Latour obviously doesn't want to go into these political terms, so he calls them the quietists. The quietists want to keep their heads and continue living as before. They have a low level of madness as they stay crazy. They are crazy, but they are able to continue living as before, as they trust, for instance, in God to take care of salvation, or in that we shall wait and see what will happen. So these are not really fond of change, but they really want to relive the past. This is what this group is fond of. Then the second group are the eco-modernists. The eco-modernist is a quite modern term for something that Latour doesn't give a name to, but the eco-modernists are totally on the other side of the spectrum as for the traditionalists. They don't want to live a life from the past, but they want to reinvent life, to make it even more modern. And Latour says Let's come to grips with the entire terrestrial system, which we can conceive as a vast machine that has stopped working properly only because we have not controlled it completely enough. So they want to be even more resolutely modern. Also, they have a low-level form of madness, as also they have an agenda of how to continue keeping on living. Then the third group, which is also the biggest group, at least Latour says so, are the depressed. And they are depressed because they carefully observe the rapid transformation of the Earth and who have decided that these can neither be ignored nor be remedied by any radical measure. This group is depressed because it doesn't have a good answer to how to change the world. They want to act rational, but at the same time, Latour calls them bipolar because how can you be rational in the realization of what is at hand or what is at stake? We can't continue keeping on living as before, as something very big is at hand, Latour would say. Then the fourth group, and this is a group Latour really wants to make, investigate, or create in this discussion, is the group of the artists, the hermits, or even more, the artists, the hermits, the gardeners, the explorers, the activists, or naturalists. This group is what this book is about, is what Facing Gaia is about. And they have a sensible, according to Latour, relation to madness, as they see that it is not a crisis and that it will not pass. They are not naive. They hope of no longer counting on hope. So this is a strange, and it sounds very pessimistic in one way, but they have lost all hope, and still they are able to continue living in a creative way in the realization of what is happening, and trying to find new ways of how to behave in this radical, alterated world. And in this group, Latour has, well, he wants to investigate this group as this group is able to challenge perspectives and is able to find new ways, investigate new ways of living in this climate condition. So we then switch to the instability of the nature-culture relationship. And the nature-culture relationship is a very fundamental aspect of Latour's book, as he sees this difference between nature and culture as where it goes wrong, that we misconceive our relationship to the world. He says that we actively construct with our thoughts how we conceive nature, and that we could also choose to construct it in a different way. So we oppose nature as to culture. On page 14, he carries on to say, we shall never be able to say too crudely of humans that they belong to nature. Moreover, if human beings were truly natural, and only that, they would be deemed no longer human at all, but only material objects or pure animals. So humans are humans, or cultural society, civilization, or cultural being, by being opposed to something else, to the naturalness, to the natural world, which serves as a passive background for our action, which is the object of our actions, which is the other. In the Western tradition, Latour says on page 15, We never speak of the one without speaking of the other. There is no other nature but its definition of culture, and no other culture but its definition of nature. They were born together as inseparable as Siamese twins who hug or hit each other without ceasing to belong to the same body. Um, After this, Latour carries on to explain the same point by the unmarked category of woman only being meaningful as opposed to a man being different from man, and he also says that nature is in the same sort of way different from what it means to be a human, a cultural being. And in order to show this, he invites us for to investigate the painting. So here we have the painting of a natural landscape. Um, and he carries on to say, but we do not pay enough attention to the symmetrical strangeness that gives the object the very odd role of being there only so as to be seen by a subject. The object is observed by the subject. The subject is observing. Someone who's looking, for example, at a still life is entirely programmed so as to become the subject in relation to the type of object, whereas the object, for example, oysters, lemons, capons, etc., have no role other than to be presented to the sight of the particular type of the gaze. So the objects are only there to be understood by us in a certain way, and we understand them not directly, but we understand them through a means. In this way, by a painting, by understanding the painting. But Latour's point is that every time we look at nature, we already have a conception of how we understand that nature to be. We construct the objects to be there as objects. We decide how we arrange them, but also how they are to us. And then after that, Latour says, what has been invented by Western painting is a pair whose two members are equally bizarre, not to say exotic, a pairing that has not been observed in any other civilization. The object for this subject, the subject for this object. So we have to look at the painting a little bit more. So what is this painter doing? And I have to say this again. Latour says that we always have a painter. We always have a means through which we conceive the natural world there to be. We do not have a neutral way of conceiving the natural world. Anyways, this painter he calls an operator, and this operator freezes the moment of the still life in this sense. He constructs certain aspects of the painting, and he essentializes this into a thought, into what we could give meaning from, derive meaning from. And this is in a contingent way. That means that it could be done differently. So what Latour really wants to understand is that we tell ourselves stories and repeat these stories when we conceive nature to be in a certain way, because we always have this operator in our head to construct how we view the natural world to be. To show this, I will go to the next slide. So, as what Latour said was a very abstract elaboration, I want to make it a little bit more concrete. I want to show you and investigate with you what this natural causal relationship is about. So, I was looking into this picture of Patagonia when we were cycling through Patagonia, and I told you about it in the other lecture. I conceived it in a certain way, and the picture maybe looks very idyllic, but I conceived it in a very different way, as the temperatures were cold. A bit colder than now at the moment in the Netherlands, and we had lots of rain, and with the cold temperature, these were very harsh conditions, as we had to constantly sleep in a tent as well. We could never really warm up, and also we had imaginably hard winds. And Then there was a last reason, and this was maybe the more conceptual but very big reason for me to be sort of afraid by the conditions, and that was that winter was coming. And if winter was coming, then we had to hurry up because it would become even more cold and it would be even more rainy and etc. And this way, I conceived nature not to be idyllic or ideal, but to be unforgivable or an inhospitable environment. And I needed to have this story of nature, to view nature in a certain way, maybe, to see nature in a subliminal way, as a wilderness, as the wilderness, and conquering the wilderness and doing something in a way special. At least that was the point that I wanted to have at the first phase in our journey, and that also changed the way that we behaved, because we were always trying to push further to go through these cold regions and survive in a certain way. And of course, it was a matter of fact that conditions were harsh, but we could also have conceived this environment in a certain other way. We could have conceived it as a leisure time or as a beautiful environment, and we did conceive it, of course, as a beautiful environment. But we could have told so many other stories of how we looked at the environment differently than from what we did. And later on throughout the journey, we came to see nature as being a very safe place, even safer than any cultural environment, as at least we would be let alone in a natural environment, and we would be able to make our own living in that, survive in that natural environment. So that relationship also changes. Um, but this is what I really wanted to show you in order to also conceptualize how you are thinking about the natural environment or about natural aspects. Here we were really telling ourselves a sort of fantasy story about traveling, having a journey, being on a journey, and having to go somewhere, and that gave meaning to what we were doing and to how we related to the natural world, but also how we related to uh, being there, as how we behaved being out there. Um, Next, I think it's time to take a short break. And to take the break, I would like to give you a small thought experiment, a thought exercise to perceive how you constructed nature for yourself to be, because we all every time, according to Latour, construct nature to be there for us in a certain way. And in doing so, we construct stories. I want you first, we do this assignment in two parts. And I first want you to take a specific moment that was meaningful to you and to then rethink or reconstruct how you conceived nature in that moment. How did you feel and why did you feel that way? Um, Take your time to write it also down and to feel how you thought about nature in that moment. And then in the second part of the assignment, I want you to deconstruct that moment. Want you to deconstruct your natural cultural relationship, because you probably were influenced by other thoughts. I mean, our thoughts don't arrive from nowhere. As I said in the previous lecture, there is no view from nowhere. We all have a history, and we all have read books or have inspiration from different art forms or thoughts, and we uh, made that into something new, into how we conceived that moment in nature for yourself. So I want you to think of what stories you used to conceptualize how you viewed nature in that moment. And then I want you to think about how you so look at which forms of art it might have influenced you. I mean, this is also a very uh, sort of This is also a speculative form of research. I want you to sort of find out what kind of ideas you use to conceptualize your own relationship with nature. And then, as a last part, I want you to look at those moments. If you could have also viewed it from a different angle, if you could have used different background theories or stories to look at that same moment and how that might have changed their conception of nature in that moment. So I hope after doing this exercise, the following statement will become clear. And this is stated at page 19. If ecology sets off panic reactions, we now understand why. Because it obliges us to experience the full force of the instability of this concept, when it is interpreted as the impossible opposition between two domains that are presumed actually to exist in the real world. Above all, don't try to turn towards nature. So it's not nature that is scary. It is our relation to nature that is scary. It is the stories that we tell ourselves of our environment being passive that no longer holds. We cannot easily turn and listen to nature, as what we will hear is our own stories. Now, you understand how you will become more crazy if you think you can reconcile nature and culture or go beyond the opposition through pacified relationships between the two. It's not that easy. That's what Latour says. Thank you for watching till now, and sorry for all the I'm a bit strange for making web lectures. Anyways, thanks a lot.